So, since we are in December and the weather is getting a little bit colder, we're going to look at one of my personal favorite frosty Pokemon. So today we're going to be looking at a very round Pokemon called Spheal. Spheal is actually an ice and water type Pokemon. And as you can see, its body is super round with two little teeth, two little hands, and a flat tail. Its belly is beige, and its fur is light blue with several white spots on its back. And all this fur is very fluffy, and it helps Spheal stay warm and retain the heat in the icy environments which it usually lives in. And if you're wondering, this is a fashion statement from this specific Spheal. So it is not something that Spheals have, but this one just has a little fashion statement, you know. We cannot judge it, but also I'm not going to stop him from letting him expressing. I'm not going to stop him from expressing himself. There we go. So, as you can see, you know, his body is very spherical. This means that it is not really ideal for swimming, and it is also not ideal for walking very quickly. So, how does Spheal move? How does it run, I guess? Spheal often moves by rolling across the ice, rolling across the ice with its circular body. So it will roll across the ice. Oh, come back to me, Spheal. There we go. Now, speaking of rolling and its sort of round body, right, leads me to what is Spheal's signature move. Its signature move is signature move in quotes, since over the year some more, you know, ubiquitous Pokemon have been able to learn this move, but Spheal right here was the first one. And I believe it is a move that matches Spheal perfectly. And this move is called Ice Ball. Now, what does Ice Ball do? Well, it allows our very ball-shaped friend over here to roll and roll and roll and roll in order to hit its opponent multiple times. Well, once per attack. But the attack stacks in the way that it keeps rolling and rolling and rolling, and with all this rolling that it keeps getting, it gains momentum, and every time it attacks with Ice Ball, it will do more damage after each consecutive hit. It might help to think about it as basically an ice type rollout move. Now, before we swiftly move on, or roll on, I guess, do you know what type of Pokemon Spheal is known as? You know, what do you think it is? Maybe it's called the round Pokemon, maybe the ball Pokemon, maybe the sphere Pokemon, maybe the seal Pokemon, as it is a seal. I'm gonna give you some time to make a guess. Make a guess. What do you think Spheal is known as? The squishy Pokemon? Definitely not. But yeah. Oh. Roll. What do you think it's known as? Well, if you guessed anything like that, then you are wrong. And to be honest, I don't blame you. I would call it something like that too, I think, you know, like the ball Pokemon, the round Pokemon, the rolling Pokemon maybe. is known as the clap Pokemon. Yeah, as in clapping your hands, you know. It's a bit strange at first glance, but there is a very interesting reason for this. You see, when Spheal is happy, it will clap its fins together. And as they are very cheerful Pokemon, they are constantly clapping their fins together. In fact, you can very easily hear a group of Spheals approaching from far away, just based on how much noise they make constantly while clapping, 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 clapping. It's gotten to the point that Spheals are commonly, quite commonly, seen clapping their little fins, you know, their hands, their fins, while they are asleep, which I think is really cute, but it also hopefully means that they are having really good dreams. But like, you know, clapping in your sleep, imagine you did that as well randomly. You were just like, oh, you're sleeping and you're like, yes, clap, clap, clap. But yeah, that is why it is called the clap Pokemon. I would personally still have called it the round Pokemon or the circular Pokemon, since, you know, look at them, they're so round. Maybe the orange berry Pokemon, I mean, they are basically shaped like an orange berry with eyes, ears, and a tail. But no, the clap Pokemon. Clap, 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 clap. Now let's look at Spheal's first evolution, which is called Celio. Now Celio is still an ice and water type Pokemon, but as you can see, it has lost a little bit of the oval body that Spheal had. With that in mind, you will not believe what it is known as. You know, it's not round anymore, but guess what it is known as now? It is no longer the clap Pokemon. It is now the ball roll Pokemon. What? Really? The ball roll Pokemon is not Spheal, but Celio. What? So now that it has lost its rotund ways, it is now called the ball roll Pokemon. Why is that? Well, yes, this is why, but there's actually a reason, and I think you might like it. You see, Celios will often balance or juggle, I guess, round objects on its nose. So, on its nose. Obviously, Spheal here is not Celio, but yeah, on its nose. In a very friendly way, of course. They're quite gentle and social Pokemon. So, this is where it gets the name, the ball roll Pokemon from. Not so much because of its round frame, but more because it balances and juggles round things. Ball roll, I guess Celio is not the ball that is rolling like Spheal. Celio is doing the ball rolling. I don't know if that makes sense. It is rolling the balls, I guess. So, yeah, let's look a bit more about Celio now, okay? As I said, they are still very friendly, and physically they are a lot larger than Spheal. Spheal here is a very little boy. But as you can see, its, you know, main features, color scheme, remain fairly similar. It now, however, has long whiskers, and its tiny little teeth have grown into larger, I guess you can call them tusks at this point, and its little fins have also grown bigger and stronger, and they can now even crush ice, which is pretty useful if you live in an icy environment. So, let's look at Celio and its ball rolling ways, specifically at its nose. Now Celios, it might not look like it, I know, but they have a very sensitive and well-developed nose. Celios have a really good sense of smell, and they use sense of smell even underwater to search for prey, They also use it, as I mentioned before, to balance things on their nose. But the reason why they do this might surprise you, So, why does it do this? Well, there are actually a bunch of reasons. Usually, whenever Celio encounters a new object, it places it on its nose and will roll them around to test for things like smell and texture. It is basically, maybe you find a new object, a pen, for example, you might grab it and look at it and be like, okay, what is this? You might feel it. Well, Celios, especially, maybe not with a pen, maybe with an item that is a bit more rounded, but they will put it on their nose and balance it and shake it around and be like, okay, the smell, the texture, this is how this feels, to kind of try to learn what this thing is, which I think is pretty interesting. And Celios will actually do this a lot with Spheals, so it will put a Spheal on its nose. Just assume that this is my Celio's nose, I guess, and it will grab the Spheals and roll them around. So their nose is actually so developed that they can, when they are rolling a Spheal around, they check the Spheal's scent, and they use this to check if the Spheal is healthy or not, which is insane that you could, by rolling a Spheal on your nose and smelling it, essentially, I guess. And also the texture, you can feel how this Spheal feels. Try to say that 10 times fast. Feel how this Spheal feels. I don't know. They can know if this Spheal is healthy, or maybe they have some issue with their health. Hopefully not. But yeah, and the third reason that they juggle stuff on their nose is just to have fun and play around. They are very friendly Pokemon, very social Pokemon. They like to play around as well. Now, when Celio has gained a bunch of experience, it will evolve into its final stage, called Walrein. Now, Walrein is still an ice and water typed Pokemon, and it is now known as the Ice Break Pokemon. You can probably guess why. No. Because it breaks ice. Exactly, because it breaks ice. Now, it is even larger, and its body is protected by a really thick layer of blubber underneath the skin, which is perfect for the icy waters where Walrein lives. It still maintains the same sort of color scheme as its previous evolution, but all of its features have grown a lot larger. Again, its tail and fins have gotten a lot bigger. Its whiskers, which Spheal does not have, its whiskers have developed into a sort of white fur that covers all of its face and back of the neck, I guess. And more noticeably, its tiny little teeth are now very large tusks, and they are very sharp, which is not only perfect for defending itself, and maybe, for breaking ice, as it is known as the Ice Break Pokemon, after all. In fact, these tusks are very special because they can grow back really quickly if they ever were to break. And as a little fun fact that we found as well, is that Walreins have been seen asleep with their tusks stuck on the ground. Probably whilst tending to their tusks, trying to take care of them. I just thought it was kind of funny that you can fall asleep with your teeth, stuck on the ground. Now, Walrein, just like its previous evolutions, live together in herds. So a lot of them together, a lot of Walrein, Celios and Spheals together in generally icy seas. And Walreins are typically seen as, like, the guardians and the protectors of the group, as final evolutions tend to be in the wild. So they make sure that everyone in the herd is safe. The little Sphealios are happy and rolling around, but they are also protected. And yeah, that is their role, obviously, as a lot of last evolutions tend to do, as I mentioned. Now, it's time to look a bit at the moves, okay? We have already mentioned Ice Ball, rolling, Ice Ball. But Walrein can also learn a lot more moves, especially ice and water type moves. For example, it can learn Ice Fang, which makes sense considering its massive tusks. I know Spheal only has little ones, but I can also learn stuff like Aurora Beam, Surf, and Brine for some water type moves as well. And even Sheer Cold, which is a very, very powerful move. It is so powerful, in fact, that this move will cause the opponent to faint. If it hits, the opponent will just faint. But of course, that is if it hits. It is a move that is very, very, very hard to hit. But if it hits, it's over. Oh, and of course, it also learns Blizzard. Like 99.99% of all ice types. Of course it learns Blizzard. Rip my boy Snum, who cannot learn it, as the only ice type who cannot learn it. But yeah, via TM, it can also learn a lot of moves. As always, I think we're going to do one move per type, okay? Because otherwise we're going to be here all day. So, here we go. It can learn Crunch for dark type moves, Body Press for fighting type moves, Earthquake for ground, Giga Impact for normal, Rest for psychic, if you count that, Rock Slide for, rock, and Heavy Slam for steel. So, as you can see, there are a lot of moves that involve throwing your really big body at the opponent and dealing a lot of damage. But they are also able to shoot attacks and deal damage from a distance, I guess we could say, Finally, let's look at the three abilities that Walrein can have. The first one is Thick Fat. Very self-explanatory, self-explanatory, it makes sense because they have to have very thick fat in order to resist the harsh environments. What does thick fat do, though? So it basically reduces the damage taken from fire and ice type moves. So if Walrein is to be hit with a fire or an ice type move, it will deal generally, I think it's half of the damage that it would normally take. So if Walrein was to be hit with, say, Flamethrower, and this Flamethrower would do 100 damage, just to put a number, it would do 50 in this situation because thick fat reduces half of the damage. And the same thing happens with ice type moves. Its second ability is Ice Body, which also makes sense because they are an ice type Pokemon and they have a pretty icy body. What does Ice Body do? Well, you see, if it is snowing or hailing, Walrein will slowly heal over time. But only if it's snowing or if it is hailing. Pretty useful if you have a strategy based around snow or hail. Snow or hail. Sorry, I don't know, Spheal is just rolling around. He loves it, I'm telling you. And the last ability, the third one, is called Oblivious. And what does it do? Oh, Spheal. Okay. Let's put you back like this. This one might have Oblivious. It makes it so that Walrein is immune to some effects and abilities, such as being infatuated, falling for taunts, or being affected by stuff such as intimidate. It cannot be scared, it cannot be taunted because it is so oblivious. These abilities, I think, make them maybe not oblivious so much, but the other two make them very well suited for cold environments and give them, defensive resiliences against certain types, certain potential hazards, And I think that is all the time that we have for today. I hope that this lesson brought these ICCs that we don't really hear much about. I hope that it brought these ICCs to life for you. Maybe you're imagining now, you can picture a Spheal rolling around the ice, maybe being balanced by a Celio, while a Walrein watches over the herd and makes sure that everyone is safe and everyone is happy, while the little Spheals clap their little hands. I hope you have an amazing rest of the day. Remember to stay warm in this cold weather, as we unfortunately don't have the thick fur that Spheal here has. And if it snows, hey, maybe you can also roll around the snow like a Spheal. Anyways, it's time to roll away now. Okay, so goodbye, and until next class. Hello class, welcome back. I hope you are comfortable, relaxed, and ready to learn, because today we're going to be studying a Pokemon that is round, very small, and also very soft, and that is Azurill. Here he is. Now, Azurill is known as the Polka Dot Pokemon. The Polka Dot Pokemon. It is a normal and fairy type Pokemon. And I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. It looks like a water type, am I right? And that is because its evolutions are indeed water type. But little Azurill does not get that typing just yet. Now, if you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought Azurill was only a normal type, not a normal fairy. Well, we thought that too, until we discovered that it is definitely a fairy type Pokemon too. And you might be wondering, how do you discover that, Well, we had some suspicions already, but there was an incident some years ago that confirmed it, where there was basically a wild Salamence. I know, very scary, a wild Salamence. And it used Draco Meteor, which is a dragon type move, and it hit the Azurill. And the Azurill was fine after getting hit by that. So we had to investigate it, because we were like, there's no way that could happen, We thought, I don't know, maybe the Azurill dodged the attack, the meteor came and he's like, maybe it used Protect, so it doesn't take damage. Maybe that just happened to be the most insanely strong and powerful Azurill in the world, and it was fine. Well, after some experiments and testing, we discovered that it was definitely a fairy type as well as a normal type. And from that moment on, we started to classify Azurill and its evolutions as also being fairy type Pokemon. And we still have some people saying, oh, back in my day, Azurill was just a normal type Pokemon. Well, yes, but times change. Research now says that it is now a normal and fairy type Pokemon. We have to update it. Try using a dragon type move on your Azurill. It will not work, because obviously fairy is immune to dragon type attacks. Anyways, let's get that out of the way and look at its biology. Okay, its biology. Now, Azurill, as you can see, is blue. Very nice. And it is very round, has a big sphere here. That is like its head. And one sphere here. That is the tip of its tail. And this little thing is its tail right here. It has two little ears, 1 ear, 2 ear, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2 little ears, 2 little feet, 1 foot, another foot, foot, and 2 little sweet white cheeks, 1 little sweet white cheek, and the other one is over here, you can barely see it. Now, Azurill's body, as you might guess, is extremely light, almost like a balloon of some sort. In fact, its tail is actually used as a flotation device, so that Azurill will not sink into the water. The tail is actually also quite bouncy, and Azurills like to play with their own tails quite a lot. However, that is not all the uses that the tail has, as Azurill can also spin its tail around, and throw it. And, because they're throwing their tail, obviously their body is going to get pushed forwards as well. And they can move up to 10 meters or 33 feet in distance by throwing their tail, and then obviously their body comes along, which is insane considering that Azurill is only 20 centimeters or 8 inches tall, so they're really throwing their tail and like flying 10 meters forward, which I think is insane. However, this is not how they usually move around, and neither is walking normally with their 2 tiny little feeties. You see, Azurills, as you can see in this photo, like to bounce on their tail to move around. As I said, their tail is very bouncy, and they use this like massive, in comparison to them, massive tail to stay in balance and kind of bounce around on their tail to move around. Kind of useful in my opinion. As you can see, that's a lot of uses for this tail, and here is one more use for its tail. As you might imagine, right? It can use this tail to defend itself. Obviously, Azurill is not an aggressive Pokemon. I mean, look at him. But if they need to, they can defend themselves by moving around their tail in circles, like we said, and hitting opponents with it, or maybe flinging themselves at the opponent with the spinning of the tail. Usually they would do it to get away, but if they need to, they can do that as well. And one more important use for this tail, I know this tail is everything, but there's some use for this tail, is that, okay, Azurill's tail is actually filled with nutrients needed for growth. Yeah, so it stores nutrients in its tail. Did you expect that? I think it's kind of crazy that you have this tail that you use for so many things, and on top of that, it is where you keep your nutrients. Like, you have to take really, really good care of this tail if you are in Azurill. So it's crazy to me that the part of your body that you store energy is also the one that you use to fight, to like fling yourself around, to float, to anything, But yeah, that's enough about Azurill's tail for now. Let's move off to other things, okay? For example, personality. As I said, it is not an aggressive Pokemon. Look at him. He's a little bean. Now, emotionally, Azurill is very sensitive, and can easily become overwhelmed, agitated, or anything like that. And honestly, same. I relate to Azurill. Anyways, Azurills prefer to live near rivers, lakes, and relaxed, calm shorelines where it can play safely and stay close to others. So, very nice and relaxed. Now we have to move on to some slightly strange things about Azurill that have to do with like Pokedex numbers and a bunch of funky things like that. Because Azurill is quite different from its evolutions in some of these things. So, firstly, its Pokedex number, okay? The Pokedex number for Azurill is 298. And its evolutions, which has two of, are numbers 183 and 184. And you might be wondering how and why, since usually, a Pokemon's evolutions will follow numbers earlier, and they were therefore registered in the Pokédex before we even knew Azurill existed, So when Azurill was discovered and registered into the Pokédex, we could not change the numbers of every Pokemon so that Azurill could get its spot, I guess. So Azurill had to be given a higher number. This actually happens a lot with baby Pokemon. Yes, of course. So Azurill is what we call a baby Pokemon. He is so baby. And basically what you need to know is that there are Pokemon that are babies, and they usually tend to be really weak, and they require a lot of friendship and love in order to be able to evolve. For example, look at Togepi and Clefairy. They are so baby. They are a baby Pokemon. Another strange thing about Azurill is that its gender ratio is 75% female. That means that if you have 4 Azurills, chances are that 3 of them are female and only 1 of them is a male. But weirdly enough, when we look at its evolutions, the gender ratio of those evolutions goes back to 50-50, which means if you have 4 Azurills, 2 of them are male, 2 of them are female, which is the most common percentage in all creatures, all Pokemon. Humans, we have that ratio as well. And speaking of evolution, how does Azurill evolve? Well, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of baby Pokemon require high friendship to evolve. So basically, to evolve Azurill, you have to take care of it and love it a lot, which should be quite easy if you're a good person, which I'm sure you are. So let's look at its first evolution, right? Now when Azurill has grown close enough to its trainer, it will evolve into Marill. So Marill is a water and fairy type Pokemon. It's no longer a normal type like Azurill. It is now a water, and it maintains its fairy type, so water fairy. And it is now known as the Aqua Mouse Pokemon because it is an aquatic Pokemon and it looks a bit like a mouse. Nice and easy. By the way, if you ever thought that its name was Peekaboo, you're either really old and not up to date at all, or, I don't know, you see, Peekaboo was the unofficial name given to Marill when it was first discovered, but it was quickly changed to Marill. But some really old documents still mention Peekaboo sometimes, so if you ever encounter the name Peekaboo, just know that it refers to Marill and not some special blue Pikachu. It's not a shiny, it's not a blue Pikachu, it's referring to Marill. You won't encounter it much, but as I said, some old documents do mention it sometimes. Now, as you can see, right, Marill gets a little bit bigger and maintains its round shape, just like Azurill right here. And however, a lot of the features stay quite similar. As I said, the little ears stay the same with Marill. The little feet are the same with Marill, but it now has grown hands. What a legend. I'm so proud of you, Marill. Pick up you, go get your hands. So, in general, its body is bigger, and it allows it to be able to walk normally as well. Normally, I mean, without having to bounce on its tail, walking on 2 feet, basically. However, they are still able to float on water very easily, and they are very good swimmers. As, you would expect a water type Pokemon to be a good swimmer, so they are a good swimmer as well. Marills are very cheerful and energetic, and they're often found splashing happily or playing along riverbanks or calm shorelines, just as Azurill. Now, another fun fact is that Marill's fur repels water. What does that mean? So, that basically means that Marill is in the water, it's swimming and all that stuff, and as soon as it gets out of the water, it is dry. It's not wet. When it gets out of the water, it dries really, really quickly, it's kind of handy. I gotta admit, it's kind of handy. So, that's everything about the little Peekaboo over here, little Marill over here. lastly, we need to see, what happens when it evolves, right? It evolves by gaining enough experience, like Pokemon tend to do. No need for friendship, but please love your Marill. Anyways, and do you know what it evolves into? No, take a guess. You can guess it. So we have Azurill, we have Marill, right? We put them together, and boom, you get Azumarill. If that isn't a mix of both names, I don't know what is. Now, Azumarill is the final stage of the evolution line, right? It is still a water and fairy type Pokemon. However, Marill was the Aqua Mouse Pokemon, and Azumarill is the Aqua Rabbit Pokemon. Bit of a random update to the name, but that's how it is. Now Azumarill gets even larger, and its ears become more rabbit-like, hence the name Aqua Rabbit. And it now has a bunch of white spots on its body, and the lower half of its body is now white as well. Azumarill is calm, dependable, and very protective. It often, watches over small Pokemon near the water, as last evolutions tend to do. They're kind of like the carrying, protective figure of the smaller, weaker Pokemon. Despite this, soft and friendly appearance, and generally being a sort of defensive Pokemon, a Pokemon that can withstand a hit, but maybe is not a strong attacker. Azumarill can actually pack a good punch as well. And the reason for that has to do with one of its abilities. And with that being said, I think that's a good time to transition and look at Azurill, Marill, and Azumarill's abilities. Okay, so they actually get 3 abilities, and I would argue that all 3 are quite useful. I said we start with the one that I mentioned just now, and it is the reason why Azumarill can pack such a strong punch, and that ability is called Huge Power. Huge Power. If that doesn't sound intimidating, come on, Huge Power. Now this actually used to be Azumarill's, Marill's, and Azurill's signature ability, meaning that they only they had it. There was no other Pokemon that learned the ability Huge Power. But over time, more Pokemon have developed this ability too. But it was basically Azurill, Marill, and Azumarill's first. So what Huge Power does is it basically doubles a Pokemon's attack stat. That is insane. I know it sounds crazy, because it is. Azumarill, it's not that much of an attacking Pokemon, but with Huge Power, doubling its attack, it is definitely a force to be reckoned with. Now, the second ability that it has is called Thick Fat. Thick Fat, Thick Fat. What basically this ability does is it halves the damage received from fire and ice type moves. And I know that, those moves don't do too much to Azumarill because it already resists both of those types. But with Thick Fat, attack from those moves will do nothing at all, considering it's already resisted, and then it does half damage. So it's not going to take basically any damage from ice and fire type moves. And the last ability that it gets is actually its hidden ability, and it is called Sap Sipper. Sap Sipper, Sap Sipper. So it sips on sap. Now, you might be thinking, if you're going against Azumarill, oh, Azumarill is a water type Pokemon, which means that it is weak to grass type attacks. Well, with Sap Sipper, Azumarill takes no damage from grass type attacks, and if you hit it with a grass type move, it will get an attack boost. Pretty scary. So as I said, 3 pretty useful abilities. As you can see, they can surprise you if you don't know which one it has. Do you want to risk using a grass type move on an Azumarill if you don't know whether, it might just take your attack and get stronger, If it has Sap Sipper, do you want to risk wasting a turn using a grass type move to make the enemy stronger? Probably not, right? But what if you're like, okay, maybe it has Sap Sipper, let's not use a grass type move, but it actually has Huge Power, and you're scared of using the move that would do a lot of damage to it, because you're like, what if it just zips it up? but it actually has huge power and is hitting you for stronger attacks than it should be able to. You gotta decide. Now, let's look at some of the moves that it can use. It learns, as a bunch of water type Pokemon do, it learns all your classic water type moves, such as Water Gun, Bubble Beam, and at higher levels even Hydro Pump. But interestingly, it only naturally learns 2 fairy type moves, which is strange considering it is a fairy type Pokemon. Those moves are Charm and Play Rough, and Charm doesn't even do damage, so it only learns naturally 1 damaging fairy type move. At least it's a pretty strong one, being Play Rough. And it also learns your classic normal type moves, such as, Tail Whip, Tackle, Defense Curl, and on and on and on. But interestingly, it also learns a rock type move, a flying type move, and a fighting type move. Can you guess any of them? Any of the 3 moves? So, the rock type move it learns is Roll Out, Roll Out, Roll Out, Roll Out, which makes sense considering how round it is, And then for the flying type move, you might have been able to guess it as well. It learns Bounce, so it can bounce, presumably on its tail, and when it's on its higher evolutions, it can bounce as well. And for fighting type move, do you know what fighting type move it learns? Superpower. Superpower. What? Yes, Superpower, which is a very, very strong move. And somehow, the strongest Azumarill can actually learn Superpower, which is crazy. Now, as always, to finish off, we're going to look at some of the TMs that it can learn, because Azumarill can learn these moves naturally, but through TMs, it can learn a bunch more moves. And as always, I think we're going to do 1 move per type of move that it can learn. So 1 move for a dark type move it can learn, 1 move for fairy, and on and on and on. Okay, so here we go. It can learn Knockoff for dark type moves, Draining Kiss for fairy, Break Break for fighting, Grass Knot for grass, believe it or not it's grass, Mud Shot for ground, Body Slam for normal, Light Screen for psychic, Water Pulse for water, and Blizzard for ice. What a shocker, right? It learns Blizzard. And if you pay attention to my last lessons, you will know that not many Pokemon learn the move Blizzard. And if you cannot tell, that was sarcasm, because there is a ridiculous amount of Pokemon that can learn the move Blizzard, which makes no sense whatsoever. For example, Phoebus can learn Blizzard. Yeah, the silly little fish can learn it. And for some reason, Tauros can learn Blizzard as well. Like what? It's a bull. Where is it getting ice from? But, yeah, I don't know. Anyways, yeah, Pokemon are truly fascinating creatures, right? But as you can see, Azumarill learns a variety of different moves. Its move pool is not as broad as other Pokemon that we've looked at, but it is a respectable amount of moves and types of moves. So, that's everything for today's class. Remember, as a takeaway, that appearances can be misleading. Even the smallest and cutest looking creatures can be dangerous if you are not nice to them. They are not aggressive Pokemon, but if you're not nice to them, they will defend themselves, and with huge power, who knows what could happen. So, make sure to treat everyone nicely. I'm sure you do, but treat everyone nicely. It's nice and easy. Just be nice. That's the takeaway for today. Be nice. Go out there and be nice to someone. Whether it's saying please and thank you or doing something bigger. Go do something nice, okay? Anyways, good work today, class. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care and goodbye. Bye, 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 bye. Hello, class. So, today we have a very cool lesson. In my opinion, very interesting lesson. Because we're learning about Piplup. Now, get over here. Lazy little boy. Here he is. This is a very, very big Piplup, as you can see. Now this one is definitely an XXL Piplup. Piplups are usually around 40 centimeters tall, which is around 1 foot and 4 inches. Now this one, as you can see, is also a very lazy one. Piplups are usually more active than this one too. Anyways, Piplup is a water type Pokemon, and it is known as the penguin Pokemon. As you can see, it is a penguin. As you can see, it is a light blue Pokemon with a darker head, and the blue feathers on its head actually extend down to its back and around its neck, making it kind of look like Piplup is wearing a cape. If you can see, it's like he's wearing a little cape, you know. Now, Piplup has two big white ovals on his chest and a relatively normal looking beak with a small light blue marking on top of it, resembling, can you guess what this resembles? It resembles a crown. Very good. Now, it also has flippers for arms to help it swim, and also yellow feet with 3 toes, that are also very, very fit for swimming very fast. Speaking of, Piplup is actually a very strong and skilled swimmer. Unfortunately, it is not a great walker and will unfortunately fall down quite often when attempting to walk or run a bit too fast. However, it can actually very, very, very briefly fly as well. I'd consider it more gliding down, you know, with its feathers and its wings and anything, but we can consider it flying, if that's nicer as well. Now, where do you think Piplups usually live? Cold climates, yes, they are a penguin. Yeah, usually they live along the seashore in cold climates. Now, Piplups usually have a very strong sense of pride. So, for example, it's really hard for them to accept food from humans, and they might also initially have a hard time bonding with its trainer because they're so prideful, you know. They're like, I can do it all myself. I don't need you to get food for me. I don't need you to teach me how to battle or all these things. Now, speaking of battling, let's get into its moves and abilities, okay? Now, starting with the abilities, Piplup gets Torrent and Competitive. Now, the most common ability it gets is Torrent, which I'm sure you already know. Torrent increases the strength of Piplup's water type moves when it's on a pinch. So, when it has low health, Piplup's water type moves will be around 50% stronger. Now, Competitive is the least common ability, but what it does is that it increases Piplup's special attack when any of its other stats are decreased by its opponents. For example, if an opponent uses any move that would lower any of Piplup's stats, its special attack will increase because of its competitive nature, or competitive ability in this case. By the way, all of Piplup's evolutions also get the same abilities, Torrent and Competitive. Now, when it comes to moves, Piplup actually learns a variety of water type moves, such as Water Gun, Bubble Beam, and other moves like Peck, as you can see. Very, very equipped to use Peck, right here. Very big Peck. And we will look at the TM moves and all that stuff when we reach its final evolution, like always, okay, no worries. Last thing to note, before moving on, is that Piplup is one of the starter Pokemon that trainers in the Sinnoh region usually get to start their adventure with. The other two being Chimchar and Turtwig. So, are there any other questions about the Piplup? Oh, wait, before you even ask the question, I don't even have to wait for you to ask. You want to know what happened to my pinky finger, don't you? Well, you see this Piplup here was actually playing around really big boy, and let's just say he put some strength on the bite while playing around, and he hurt me a little bit. It's crazy, to be honest, because Piplup can't even learn the move bite, but you know, this one here might be the first one ever to do it, because it bit me so hard by accident. But for now, hey, no Piplup can learn the move bite. So, let's go, okay. When Piplup gets enough battle experience, it will evolve into Piplup. Kind of similar name, but not the same Pokemon. Piplup into Piplup. Now, Piplup is still just a water type Pokemon, and it is still called the Penguin Pokemon. Quick question: do you know, apart from Piplup and Piplup, do you know what other Pokemon is called the Penguin Pokemon? Think. What other Penguin Pokemon do you think there is? It's Ice Cube. That makes sense, right? Anyways, Piplup grows to be about double the size of Piplup, so not much bigger than this one, to be honest. And still has the same color scheme, right? The main difference is the yellow sort of like ridges that it emerge from its beak that go over the back of its head, it now also has 4 white spots on its belly, and the flippers have grown way larger and sturdier, so much in fact that it is said that they're able to knock over and snap trees. And a last little fun fact about Piplup is that they apparently really like to sing, and their singing voice tends to be quite powerful, you know, and is in fact often compared to, I quote, their singing voice, is often compared to a roaring tide. So very powerful voice, you know, very cool. So moves. About the moves, right? Piplup learns Metal Claw when it evolves, and it can learn a variety of powerful water type moves such as Brine, Whirlpool. So we'll focus more on the moves on the final evolution. Okay, don't worry. Speaking of its evolutions, I think we should move on to the next one, okay? What do you think? So, after getting enough battle experience, Piplup evolves into... Tell me, who does Piplup evolve into? Who does it evolve into? If you said Blastoise, you're wrong, and you probably need to revise a bit more before your exams. However, if you said Empoleon, you're correct. So, Empoleon is known as the Emperor Pokemon. I know, that's pretty powerful sounding, right? Anyways, it is now a water and steel type Pokemon, and it is actually the only water and steel type Pokemon to date. Empoleon is again double the size of Piplup. And okay, I think we begin with its face. Okay, its face. Most notably, the horns that come out of its beak, which look a lot like a trident. Now, this is considered a symbol of leadership and strength for Empoleons, meaning that the leader of the group tends to be the ones that have the biggest horns. Now, a blue fin goes sort of all the way around the front of its neck and down its body. Its flippers / arms / wings are even bigger and very sharp. They're often compared to blades that are being created by a master swordsmith, so they can slice very easily. They're actually very capable of easily cutting through massive chunks of ice. And, they are Empoleon's main weapon to defend its pride. Its feet are now more webbed, and it uses them to swim at very high speeds. Empoleon is so strong, in fact, that even in ancient times, the people of the Sino region have referred to Empoleon as the Master of the Waves, which I think is a really cool title. Yes, the Sino region. I think back in the day it was also referred to as the Hisui region, but now it's known as the Sino region. and they refer to Empoleon as the Master of the Waves. Very, very powerful title. Now, when it comes to stuff like its moves, right, it actually learns Aqua Jet upon evolving, which is a bit interesting, and it can learn a variety of stronger moves, such as Drill Peck, Hydro Pump, and even Wave Crash. Weirdly enough, considering that now it is also a Steel-type Pokemon, it cannot actually learn any Steel-type moves naturally. It learns Metal Claw as a Piplup, but it doesn't actually learn any Steel-type moves when it becomes a Steel-type Pokemon, which is a bit strange. Even by a TM, there's only two damaging Steel-type moves that Piplup can learn, which are Flash Cannon and Steel Beam, which is very little considering it is a Steel-type Pokemon, you know. However, it can learn a lot of other moves from other types, such as, Liquidation, which is a Water-type move, but also to a lot of different types, such as Rock Slide, which is a Rock-type move, Ice Beam and Blizzard, which are Ice-type moves, Earthquake, which is a Ground-type move, Break, a Fighting-type move, Giga Impact, a Normal-type move, Throat Chop, which is a Dark-type move, and even a Grass-type move, such as Grass Knot. So, a variety of very strong moves from a lot of different types, right? And that's just to name a few. There's a bunch more, but obviously, I don't want to bore you too much. It can actually also learn Ghost and Fairy type moves as well, which is fun. So, I think that's enough of Piplup's moves for today. And I think, honestly, this Piplup, I think he needs a rest, and I think you need a rest from all these lessons as well for a little bit. So, I think we're gonna stop this lesson right here. I think Piplup here needs a rest. He's always laying down. So, to be honest, it's not like he hasn't been getting a rest this entire class, huh, Piplup? Anyways, thank you so much for coming to class, and I think next time we might do a Pokemon that is not a initial partner, a starter Pokemon from any of the regions. So, please keep up with me to help me pick which one we should do next. Bye. Say goodbye, Piplup. Bye, bye, bye. Hey, class. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm so glad you could make it to class, regardless. So, because it's Valentine's Day today, I thought we would look at a Pokemon that is often associated with love, right? So, I think it's pretty obvious which Pokemon that is, right? So, let's begin with Luvdisc. Now, Luvdisc is a pure water type Pokemon, so it is only a water type, and it is known as the Rendezvous Pokemon. The Rendezvous Pokemon. I know. Now, Luvdisc is a small, pink, heart-shaped Pokemon that usually lives in warm, shallow seas, particularly around coral reefs, for example. Its body is extremely thin, as you can see, and it is very sort of like laterally compressed, It kind of looks like it's been squished a little bit. This, however, allows Luvdisc to glide through the coastal waters where it lives. Luvdiscs actually conserve energy because their body is so slim, because they're allowed to drift with the natural currents, making it very well suited and very adaptable to different environments because it's just able to glide across. Its heart shape is also very important for this because that with the flattened body and the rounded edges that it has helps it reduce drag, right? Which allows Luvdisc, as I said, to easily maneuver around, for example, coral formations without damaging itself or damaging its surroundings or anything like that. So it will, expertly, I guess, swim around everything. This makes, Luvdisc a Pokemon that is really adapting, not to fight, but to, just to exist, for like coexistence, I guess you can say, As you will see later, it is not a Pokemon that is known for being a battler, a strong fighter, but rather further, it is a Pokemon that is quite fast because of its aerodynamic shape, as we discussed. I guess you can call it aerodynamic in the water as well, you know. But it's a Pokemon that just kind of coexists. It's not a fighter, and it does just live its life, you know, loving a lot, as you will see. And as I mentioned, you know, as you can imagine, they live in coral reefs, and they also tend to make their nests in coral reefs, or houses, however you want to call it, right? Now, Luvdiscs are known for love, not only for their heart shape, but also, as I said, they are a Pokemon that really likes love, right? They are rarely encountered alone, and they are most often seen swimming in pairs, you know, as a couple, as a duo. In fact, it is said that if a Luvdisc is alone, it is said to be really sad and become really disheartened. So, you know, it really likes to live with its partner, really likes to be with its partner. It is a Pokemon that really relies on being, you know, a couple. You know, it really wants to show its love and its affection. Now, Luvdisc is a Pokemon that is seen as a symbol of love and romance, as you can probably imagine. And it is said, the myth is, that couples which see a Luvdisc will be blessed with eternal love, which is pretty nice and romantic. But it's also the reason why popular, you know, honeymoon destinations will often make sure that they have a bunch of Luvdiscs around to kind of reassure people's love, you know. Bit scummy in my opinion, but hey, if you get to see a Luvdisc and you're on your honeymoon, I'm sure you're happy. Personally, I think people are too obsessed with this Pokemon when it comes to this whole, like, it will guarantee me love and all that stuff. Did you know that Luvdisc actually almost went extinct a long time ago? Because the belief that, you know, a Luvdisc scale, so the scales of a Luvdisc, will help you find your true love. So this myth spreads out a lot, you know, people start believing it, people start demanding for Luvdisc scales, so people start overfishing them. And what happens when you overfish? You have less fish. And, you know, it's very sad that Luvdisc had to go through this being such a loving Pokemon. Luckily, it is not the case anymore. Luvdiscs are happy and in love, so that's good as well. And as a last little sort of silly fun fact, did you know that Luvdiscs can fly? Yeah, fly. Yes, I know it's a fish. It can fly, kind of. It's a bit strange, but let me explain. Basically, right, when two Luvdiscs kiss, they can actually fly. So, if you think about it, right, it's like a heart shape and a heart shape, and if you put them together, they kind of look like wings, right? Like, imagine like butterfly wings, I guess. So when they kiss, it actually acts like them being wings, so they can, technically, there's been cases of Luvdiscs flying when kissing by shaking themselves, sort of like wings. It's, as I said, it's super weird and super like random, but yeah, it's been seen happening, so just a little fun fact that I thought maybe you would appreciate. Anyways, yeah, let's move on from that. As I mentioned, right, Luvdisc is not really a battler, it is not really a fighter. And we can see that not only in its stats, you know, it hasn't really developed any like strong attacking stats, you know, but we can also see that in the moves that it learns, that it uses, you know, it tends to use moves such as, you know, attract, charm, and sweet kiss to kind of influence the opponent, maybe confuse him, maybe lower its stats, make it fall in love, rather than trying to, you know, fight and overpower them. But it does actually get some damaging moves as well. Can you guess how many? Because it is not many. Specifically, right, Luvdisc gets 6 moves that deal damage, you know, naturally. Which obviously is not that of them are just water gun, but a bit stronger, I guess. I know it's not quite the same, but you know. And then tackle is just a tackle. It really shows that it's not a Pokemon that is an offensive battler, you know. Of course, it can also learn a bunch of moves via TM. For example, it can learn more water bag moves, such as Surf, more normal type moves, such as Substitute, which is a good defensive sort of move as well. It can also learn Psychic type moves, but the only Psychic type moves it gets are actually Rest and Agility, so no damage there, more protection, making sure it doesn't get hit. You know, it's not a battler, so you'd expect this. It can get Ice type moves in Icy Wind, for example, and Fairy type moves in Charm. And surprisingly, though, it does get one single Dragon type move. Can you guess what it is? I will give you a clue. Think about Luvdisc having scales. And if you know that move is called Scale Shot, which I guess makes sense since it is a Pokemon that has a lot of scales. But as you can see, that's not a lot of types of moves that it can learn attacks from, you know. And the attacks are not what you would call the most powerful attacks in the world, or damaging moves at all. As I said, the two Psychic type moves it gets are not even damaging type Psychic type moves. Which I think once again shows us its rather loving nature and its, you know, way to just show love and not fight, you know. Now, Luvdisc actually gets two abilities, and I would argue that they help reinforce this idea that it is a Pokemon that is not a fighter, and that it would rather, you know, adapt to the environment and more in like the caring and like loving sense. The first ability that it gets is Swift Swim, which what this does, basically it doubles Luvdisc's speed in the rain. So it makes it easier to drift through the corals, or faster I guess, to avoid conflict if they need to, or anything like that as well. And its second ability is called Hydration. Now what Hydration does is it allows Luvdisc to recover from status conditions during the rain. So it is able to, you know, maintain itself in the rain. If it has been burnt or poisoned or any of those, it can heal that burn, that poison in the rain, which is again another ability that's not used to attack or like damage the opponent, you know, but rather to help itself. And with that being said, I think that is everything for Luvdisc. It is a Pokemon that does not evolve, probably because it has reached a stage where it is comfortable, and you know, you can also take it as a way to say that you don't need to change in order to be loved. Luvdiscs remain the same the entire time, their entire lifespan, and they are the Pokemon that have the most love, that find the most love, that people associate with the most love. So you do not need to change in order to feel loved, to have love, you know. And that is actually all we have for Luvdisc. However, since we have some more time, I think we're going to talk about another similar Pokemon today as well, that also shows this like love. And that is Alomomola. Now at first glance, you might look at Alomomola and be like, that's literally Luvdisc's evolution, or like a counterpart of Luvdisc or something like that. But no, it is not. It is a completely different Pokemon. I know that it's also, you know, kind of heart-shaped, but biologically they fulfill very different roles. Our Alomomola is significantly larger and more robust than Luvdisc. It has a thicker skin, a nice rounded body as well, and it is built for endurance rather than agility, as Luvdisc was very aerodynamic, you know, and ready to like shoop, shoop, shoop around. Alomomola is a more robust Pokemon, and it is a Pokemon that endures more than Luvdisc. It also inhabits open resilient, a little bit physically defensive, a little bit more like, you need to be a little bit rougher to survive in these conditions. Now, Alomomola is also a pure water type. I know it's not helping the allegations that it could be an evolution, but trust me, it is not. Now, Alomomola is known as the caring Pokemon, which I think is really cute. And as you can imagine by the name, the caring Pokemon, you can probably guess that Alomomola is known sort of as a caretaker type of Pokemon, a Pokemon that likes to take care of others. Now, Alomomola's entire body is actually covered in this special sort of membrane which can heal wounds. And because of this, Alomomola is known to carry injured or weakened Pokemon on its back, and it will transport them across long distances, I guess, to bring them to safer waters, so they are not in danger anymore. And obviously its membrane will heal that Pokemon as well. Now, as I said, Alomomola is a lot bigger and more like robust than Luvdisc. This also allows it to withstand stronger currents, right? That's why it is able to live more in the open sea. And this also makes it very capable when it comes to protecting others, protecting small Pokemon that maybe get caught up in a current that they could not survive on their own, maybe a younger Pokemon. Alomomola is here to take care of it and help him out. Now, when we look at Alomomola's move pool, right, the amount of moves and the type of moves that it learns, we can see that it emphasizes on like recovery moves and support moves rather than offense. Because again, it is not an offensive Pokemon either. It gets moves like Wish, Aqua Ring, and Helping Hand, and it, as I said, follows this ability to like support and heal other Pokemon, making sure that other Pokemon are safe rather than using its moves to hurt others. Funnily enough, it actually also learns 6 damaging moves naturally, only 6, which is again not much, and only one of them is not a water type move, and that move is Pound. So the moves that it can learn, the damaging moves that it can learn naturally, are Whirlpool, Aqua Jet, Water Pulse, Brine, and Hydro Pump. So as you can see, 5 water type moves and 1 non-water type damaging move, and it is Pound, which is really not a strong move, which again shows us that Alomomola is a Pokemon that focuses on caring, and it is a very loving and caring Pokemon. More importantly, right, it can even learn the move Healing Wish, which, if you don't know, is a Pokemon that would cause Alomomola to faint in order to heal its ally. So it will literally make itself faint in order to help others. There really isn't anything more caring than that, right? You're like giving up not your life because you're just fainting, but you're fainting in order to make sure you heal someone else. Now, it does of course get more moves with TMs, but there really isn't that much more. It gets surprisingly Scale Shot like Luvdisc, so that's a Dragon type move, which again I can see because Alomomola also has a lot of scales. But it also gets a Fairy type move in Alluring Voice, it gets an Ice type move in Icy Wind, a Normal type move in Pain Split, which again goes with its caring nature, Pain Split, and a Psychic type move in Calm Mind, and also more Water type moves such as Waterfall. However, it can surprisingly also learn the Ghost type move Shadow Ball and the Flying type move Acrobatics, which are just a bit like out there in my opinion. Now, Alomomola's caring and like nurturing sort of role, I guess, can also be seen in its abilities, right? Its first ability, and the one that shows us the most, is called Healer. And like, come on, it's called Healer, Now, what this ability does is it has a chance to cure the status conditions of its allies in battle. So, for example, say that your Pokemon is burned, poisoned, paralyzed, any of those, right? Alomomola has a chance to cure that Pokemon from neutralizes that poison. And notably, it is an ability that does not benefit Alomomola directly. It is there purely to support others, showing once again, for the millionth time, that it is a caring Pokemon, and it's there to take care of other Pokemon and care for them. The second ability that it gets is hydration, just like Luvdisc. So it can heal its own status conditions if it is raining as well. And thirdly, we have its hidden ability, which is called Regenerator. Regenerator. Now this allows Alomomola to restore its own health when it withdraws from battle. So let me explain, right? Say you have an Alomomola on your team, you're battling with it, it takes some damage, right? So it's not at full health. Now if you switch Alomomola out, right? Whenever you send Alomomola back in, it will have restored some of its health by itself. No need for like potions or like, potions, hyper potions. This shows us that, Alomomola has adapted for sort of like long-term caregiving. And, it just needs a quick moment to recover. And then it can go back to helping those in need. I think that is really beautiful. That is a Pokemon that is so caring and willing to help other people and other Pokemon. And I believe that will be everything for Alomomola. As you can see, Luvdisc and Alomomola represent two completely different aspects of love, in my opinion. Luvdisc tells us more about like this like connection, in like a more like a romantic sort of way, as in like, love in a romantic way. And Alomomola teaches us about love in a more caring way, more sort of like a friendship, like a, you love someone because you care about them. So right before I let you go, as today's takeaway, I just want you to go out there and show love to the people around you. Whether it is a romantic partner or a friend or a family member, remember to tell people that you love and you care for them, okay? It's really important that you do that. To friends, family, whoever it is, tell your parents that you love them. Thank you again for coming to class, and I hope that you have a wonderful Valentine's Day. Stay safe, and I will see you on the next class. Goodbye. Bye bye bye. Hello class, welcome back. So, today we're going to be looking at one of the most unusual examples of collective adaptation and collaboration in marine Pokemon biology, right? And this is because we're going to be studying Wishiwashi. Wishiwashi. Now, at first glance, as you can see, this Pokemon appears quite unremarkable, I would say, unfortunately. Almost like it has no strength, like it's a bit weak, a bit not useless, but very weak, right? However, this Pokemon has a very important ecological role and a behavioral transformation that makes it one of the most fascinating species in the ocean's ecosystems. But we're going to get to all that in due time. First, let's go through Wishiwashi's basic information and, biology and all that good stuff. So, Wishiwashi, as you can see, is a very small fish-like Pokemon, right? It resembles a sardine, I guess. It typically measures at around 0.2 meters, which is about 8 inches in height. And it is very lightweight at approximately 0.3 kilograms, which is about 0.7 pounds. Now, these measurements, as you can probably imagine, make Wishiwashi very small. So small, in fact, that it is both the shortest and the lightest water type Pokemon recorded to date. Now, as you can see. And as I mentioned, it looks a little bit unremarkable as a Pokemon, right? It is a small fish with large blue eyes, which kind of look a little bit like puddles of water. It kind of also makes it look like it's always crying or about to start crying, like their eyes are like watering up, about to start crying. The top of its body is blue and the bottom is grey, while its head and tail are both white. Wishiwashi has two very small fins at the lower half of its body and a small blue dorsal fin at the top. Now, you can probably guess just by looking at it, right? But from a statistical point of view, I guess, when you look at its stats, right? Wishiwashi has very interesting stats, and unfortunately, they are interesting because they are really, really bad. Wishiwashi has a base stat total of 175. That means that if you add up its HP, its attack, its special attack, its defense, its special defense, and its speed, it adds up to 175. And this number is significant because this is the lowest number out of all the known Pokemon species. This means that when it comes to purely to statistics, Wishiwashi is the absolute weakest Pokemon of them all. It is the weakest, statistically speaking. And for those of you asking, yes, it is weaker than Magikarp, for example. However, this is, I think this helps us see that Wishiwashi is a Pokemon that is based more on, evasion and survival rather than trying to fight someone else head on, because it's not going to do well. Wishiwashi by itself exhibits a highly timid behavior. It is a Pokemon that is really shy. It avoids open areas. It prefers, reef cover or deep water surfaces, and it reacts instantly to any disturbances in the environment, like, vibrations in the water or shadows or anything like that, because, it doesn't have the fighting skills to defend itself, so it has to rely a lot on hiding and not being seen, In essence, it's basically focused on surviving, It's not trying to fight, it's trying to just escape and survive. Especially in the sea where it lives, where so many different types of Pokemon live. And unfortunately, a lot of these Pokemon are natural predators of Wishiwashi. So, Wishiwashi, because there's so many predators that are a predator of Wishiwashi, Wishiwashi is unfortunately in constant danger of falling prey to any creature, right? The thing is, right, despite the fact that Wishiwashi is so small, it is a viable food source for so many aquatic and not only aquatic predators. This is due to how common they are in the wild and how hard it is for them to defend themselves. Unfortunately, it's a Pokemon that is really easy to, catch or hunt or whatever. And it really doesn't help Wishiwashi the fact that they are incredibly tasty. Unfortunately for them, Wishiwashi have this popularity of being really, really yummy. So that doesn't help them either. So, for example, some of the natural predators could be Dugong, for example, which is, a Pokemon that is very capable of pursuing fish Pokemon, specifically in colder waters. For example, Wailmer, who's known for eating a lot of small Pokemon, and obviously its evolution, Wailord, with its big mouth, can, filter a lot of Pokemon and just kind of jump them away. And it doesn't have to be necessarily aquatic Pokemon. For example, Wingull, a Wishiwashi as well. They're a surface level hunter that, they target small Pokemon to sweep in and grab these fish Pokemon. And obviously, it's evolution Pelipper as well. They're highly efficient in scooping up Wishiwashi that might be too close to the surface. And even, Spheal, right over here, he may be really round and sweet, but it's also a Pokemon that is known for hunting fish Pokemon. So, also a predator of Wishiwashi. And of course, lastly, as humans, we have also, historically and regionally harvested Wishiwashi as a food source in a lot of coastal cultures because it is a nice and easy way to get food and survive. But there are so many other Pokemon that eat essentially Wishiwashi. Just to be honest, think of anyone who likes fish and they're probably going to like Wishiwashi. And they're probably able to hunt a Wishiwashi as long as a Pokemon can swim or get close to the water, So yeah, the combination of a Wishiwashi's size, the fact that they are so common, the fact that they are so nutritious, the fact that they're so yummy, unfortunately, puts Wishiwashi at a constant state of risk, essentially, right? And this has made it so that Wishiwashi now have evolved to rely heavily on surviving as a group, surviving in, together, a lot of Wishiwashis together to try and survive the best way they can, right? Because this need to, join with other Wishiwashis to try and survive. Wishiwashi does not rely just on its own strength. Instead, it moves in schools. If you don't know what a school is, it's a group of fish that move together, they swim around together. So this is what I mean with collective adaptation, right? And essentially being able to work together with a lot of other Wishiwashis. And this obviously brings us to one of the most important and iconic, I guess, things about Wishiwashi's entire species, and that is Wishiwashi's ability. I know. Now its ability is called schooling, and this is the only Pokemon who has this ability and who can learn this ability, and this really reflects Wishiwashi's collective survivability. Now you might be wondering, what does this ability do? Now, with this ability, as long as Wishiwashi has enough health, many Wishiwashis will instinctively gather together and sort of synchronize their actions, right? And this results in what is known as Wishiwashi undergoing and kind of being in its school form, right? Now, each individual Wishiwashi remains its own organism, but all the movements from all the Wishiwashis become perfectly synchronized, creating the appearance of a single massive Pokemon or massive entity. In fact, their coordination is so precise that the group, they basically behave like they are one Pokemon rather than a lot of Pokemon put together. So there are many Pokemon together, but they can pretty much be considered one Pokemon with how connected they are. It must be noted, however, that if these Wishiwashis that are together receive too much damage, the Wishiwashis will scatter and they will lose their powerful and intimidating form. Now you might be wondering, what is that form? Now, let's take a look at this form. Okay, so this is Wishiwashi in its school form. As you can see, Wishiwashi looks unrecognizable, and it undergoes one of the most, I think, probably the most dramatic transformation in Pokemon biology. There might be some that you could argue are more dramatic, but in my opinion, this is definitely one of the most dramatic ones in terms of how it looks, how it acts, its sheer size and everything. But we'll get to that. So, a lot of Wishiwashis, they come together and they form this massive aquatic predator, right? Or massive looking aquatic predator, because this is still just a lot of Wishiwashis, stacked on each other together, making themselves look fierce, look powerful. Now, this aquatic sort of predator has a long sort of serpent-like body structure with a glowing eye, and glowing eye-like formations, I guess, rather, that are created by glowing Wishiwashi, essentially being like, oh, we are eyes because we are, glowing. Now, this is functionally and also statistically very different. A single Wishiwashi has a base stat total of 175, but in its school form, its base stat total increases to a whopping 620, which I guess makes sense, since it's an absurd amount of Wishiwashis put together, and it kind of like adds up their stats in a way. Obviously not adds up, but strength in numbers is a thing. As a comparison, Wishiwashi in its school form has higher stats than Pokemon such as Dragonite, Garchomp, Mega Gardevoir, Mega Gengar, Latios, Darkrai. I mean, that's insane. That this little fish, or a lot of these little fishes together, have more stats than the Pokemon of your nightmares, pretty much. Now, this new form of Wishiwashi measures at about 8.2 meters tall, or 26 feet and 11 inches, and it weighs at around 78.6 kilograms, which is about 173.3 pounds. In its school form, all these Wishiwashis together become one of the most powerful aquatic sort of monsters or presences, I guess you can say, in their environment, and it is capable of overwhelming even large predators through the sheer coordinated force. In fact, when looking at this new form, even Pokemon like Gyarados will run away. And it makes sense, because when all these Wishiwashi team up to use a move like Water Gun, you're getting so many Wishiwashis using Water Gun. The power of this Water Gun is even stronger than a Hydro Pump attack, because it's so many Water Guns combined together. Another interesting thing is the scale of the Pokemon, right? The school form Wishiwashi weighs approximately 662 times more than a normal, like an individual Wishiwashi, right? So, by that we can assume that that is how many Wishiwashi are joining together to form a school, form Wishiwashi, right? So that is 262 more times than the solo form. That's a lot of fish. And obviously, moving so many fish together in this huge form is a bit slower than individual Wishiwashis are, but this is probably expected because there's so many of them. However, they are able to make their movement really fluid to really sell this idea of okay, this is one really big and really scary Pokemon, rather than this is a bunch of really small and not really scary Pokemon put together. However, this means that they have to move a little bit slower, but they always move really effectively and as one unit. Lastly, it's important to notice that because of the power that Wishiwashi has when it has its schooling form, when all the fishes are together in the region of Alola, Wishiwashi is actually earned the nickname the Demon of the Sea, which is really funny this like tiny little fish is what you guys call the demon of the sea. What? But obviously, if you know about its big schooling form, then you know what I'm talking about. So, let's move on and look at some of the moves and combat behavior that Wishiwashi have. Now, in both forms, individual and school form, Wishiwashi has a variety of water type attacks that you would kind of expect from a water type Pokemon. However, as you can probably imagine, the moves are so much stronger when they are used in the schooling form rather than when they are used by themselves, right? One Wishiwashi using Water Gun, probably not gonna do much. Over 200 of them using Water Gun, gonna do a lot more damage. So, some of the moves that it can learn include, as I said, Water Gun, Brine, Aqua Tail, Hydro Pump, and in its solo form, so one individual Wishiwashi, these attacks are going to be quite weak and primarily used to do something to get out of the way, to get away from there, But in the school form, when they're all together, the same moves become a lot more powerful due to the massive amount of Wishiwashis that are synchronized to use this move, right? So, the key principle is quite simple. Wishiwashi does not gain a new power or a new evolution or a mega evolution or, I don't know, a special attack in its school form. Rather, it multiplies what it can currently do and amplifies that a lot through their coordination, right? And, oh yeah, of course, it can also learn other moves, such as Double Edge, Uproar, and Beat Up. And with TMs, it can even learn more moves, such as the Bug type move U-Turn, and the Ice move, Ice Beam, the Psychic move Rest, the Steel type move Iron Tail, and even the Ground type move Earthquake. Yeah, which is kind of crazy. And it even gets a lot more moves, especially a lot of moves which are water and normal type moves. And just before we finish all the moves, let me once again emphasize the fact that it can learn Earthquake is insane. Obviously, a solo Wishiwashi using Earthquake, like this tiny fish using Earthquake, is not going to do a lot of damage, right? Because even if it is a very strong move, if the Pokemon using that move is very weak, the move is not going to do that much damage anyways. But if you have over 200 of Wishiwashis essentially using that move at once, it's going to do a lot more damage. And that's what you have to get from the power of the different forms of Wishiwashi. Now, that's going to be everything for the moves. And obviously, with the abilities, we've already looked at it because schooling is its only ability, and it's basically what makes the Pokemon in a way. So, let's look at one last thing, and this is Wishiwashi's kind of like role in the environment, right? Wishiwashi, in its solo form especially, is a common prey species. As I mentioned, a lot of Pokemon prey on Wishiwashi, right? This means that even if they're very weak in a way, I guess, in a really roundabout way, and they are really contributing to the food chain of many aquatic predators. It's very unfortunate for Wishiwashi, but it's very important as a part of the marine ecosystem. Without Wishiwashis, a lot of other species of Pokemon would not be able to eat, would not be able to survive, would not be able to evolve, And then when we look at Wishiwashi's school form, this is Wishiwashi being like, okay, it's time for me to be a bit in control, to become a dominant force within the environment, and being able to kind of fight against these predators just through its presence. As I said, for example, even scaring away Gyarados, which is a scary Pokemon in itself. Now, this behavior is really other Pokemon that help other Pokemon that live in groups that have strong friendships, you know, and as I said, they can be wild Pokemon. They don't have to be a trainer who's friends with their Pokemon. They can be two random wild Pokemon who are friends. But I think the connection that Wishiwashi has with its fellow Wishiwashis is a different kind of connection, as they essentially kind of become a new Pokemon to defend themselves. And yeah, I think that's really admirable, and I think that is really powerful connection. And with that being said, that will be everything for Wishiwashi today. As a quick conclusion, Wishiwashi, as I mentioned, represents one of the most extreme examples of collective survival in the Pokemon world. By itself, it is quite literally the weakest Pokemon when we look at specifically its stats. It is a fragile Pokemon, and it is very easy to prey on, unfortunately. But when it joins together, it becomes a massive, coordinated monster, if you want to call it that, that is capable of fighting back against a lot of the predators that they could not deal with when they were alone, and even scaring them away, you know. So, Wishiwashi, I believe, shows us that strength is not always individual. Sometimes strength comes from unity, from synchronization, and from shared survival instinct. So, as I said, strength in numbers. And in the case of Wishiwashi, strength in numbers is really important because it is essentially the difference between being attacked or, you know, doing the attacking. It is the difference between being vulnerable or being dominant, being in control. So, with that being said, thank you so much for coming to class. I hope you learned a little bit about this extreme case of teamwork, and I hope to see you soon in the next lesson. Goodbye. Bye bye. Take